Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to tell you about this sword right here. This is the Red Cherry Blossom Katana from Time Blade Guild. And before I get into the video, a couple quick disclaimers. First, this is a review sample. I didn't spend any money on it. If you think that makes me biased, you know at the start. Two, I study swordsmanship. I've talked about swords on the internet for a long time, but I don't necessarily fancy myself an authority figure. You should keep that in mind as you hear my babbles. The other bit you should know is that this is a $464 katana on Time Blade Guild, and I believe it's made by Shadow Dancer. It looks the same as offerings on their website. $464 is, I believe, the tier of sword that I have. There's a $432 and then a $30 more, or $32, a little bit more for Hishigami Pro, which is, I believe, what this one is because the Ito is very tight, and I believe that's what I requested. So anyway, that is what I've got for you here today. You should also know, just one more caveat, I actually picked this from the website. The folks at Time Blade Guild said I could pick some stuff from the website. I got some lightsabers, I got this sword. I'll review the lightsabers later, but this is one that I chose, and I chose it because I don't have a lot of examples of this katana, but it is also a style of katana that I can't use the way that I'm used to using a katana. So the amount of EI that I can perform with it is somewhat limited. Anyway, it's not going to stop me from reviewing it, so here we go. All right, sword friends, I'm going to start with the kasha, the end bit, this pommel bit right here, the end of the handle. And what I can tell you is these are in a cherry blossom theme, and the casting quality of the cherry blossom theme is not bad, but it's not exactly great. I can make out more details than I see on a lot of cast fittings out there, but less than I would like to see in a $500 sword. It's not the end of the world bad. It's not egregious at the same time. It's just not as crisp and detailed as I would like to see. In terms of functionality, though, this is where I think the folks that manufacture this at Shadow Dancer really nail things. Is it's not got any hot spots on it. It feels comfortable if I kind of rub my skin on it. All the transitions, the way the Ito lines up here is great. The way the knots stand out isn't proud. Like everything about this section is more or less the way that it's supposed to be, and well and above beyond what I typically see in swords around $400 or $500. They really did a pretty solid job on this, at least in terms of like tying it down and making it solid. Also, I've practiced with this a little bit, but if I pull on it and loosen it, nothing comes undone. This is exactly what you would hope to see, but I'm glad that you can buy swords like this, because there's a lot of things where you start pushing on the kasha, it comes off, it loosens really quickly, and that's a sign that you're going to have duct tape on your handle or have to apply lacquer, or that it's not as tight as it needs to be if you're actually going to practice with it and use it. This is, and they've consistently done it well. This is no exception. Anyway, apart from the cherry blossoms being a little bit meh, the rest of it is really quite good. It's not bunchy over here. The knots are good. Nothing is loose, and that is as much as I can say about the kasha area. As I move down the handle, it has a slightly wasted shape. The Ito is tight. I would say that if I'm going on the totality of Ito, is it perfect? No. Ideally, you can just put your entire weight, that these knots are so tight that if, regardless of how hard you push on them, they don't move. This one will move. I can get it to move, but it's very, very tight. Seldom is anything super tight in the mass reproduction side of things. This is an A-level performance in terms of what you can get in mass reproduction stuff. It's really very solid. And on a $400 or $500 sword, most of the time I get these and they give me the impression they're not going to wear out quickly. A lot of manufacturers put out stuff that gives me the impression I'm going to have to lacquer it if I really want it to last. This feels like it's going to be solid for years and years. It's not perfect, but it's also really quite exceptional when we talk about the price point and where the industry seems to be. Shadow Dancer and Time Blade Guild seem to be doing this well. This is tight, good, and isn't going anywhere for anytime soon. I have also practiced with this sword a bit, not the same amount that I typically do, because I can't, as I mentioned, do EI that I'm used to. The way the tip is shaped and sharpened would have me cutting my hand open pretty frequently. So I did not use it the same amount, but I've swung it at things, I've hit things, I've handled it quite a bit, and the Ito is not coming loose. I've also had a number of swords from Shadow Dancer, and they seem to be holding up reasonably well. So I'm reasonably confident in the tightness of Ito. Apart from that, there are a little cherry blossom Minuki on here. The Samegawa panels on here are not particularly small nodule. There's some that are larger in here, which is pleasant to see. A single Makugi peg holds things together, and haven't felt any rattle in the handle. Nothing is jiggling, nothing is loosened over time. The overall handle shape is also quite good. It feels solid in my hand. It doesn't turn, it locks in, it indexes well. It's very well shaped and very comfortable. As I move up to the fuchi area here, it's got the cherry blossom theme that matches. Oddly, the fuchi is a little bit more detailed than the kasha. I don't know if they're from different batches or exactly what, but I can make out a little bit more nanako and some subtle detail in the fuchi that I couldn't make out in the kasha. So for what it's worth, though, this is a little bit more detail. As I move up to the tsuba, actually, before I move up to the tsuba, I should note that the transitions and all of that kind of stuff on the fuchi are also really good. Everything lines up really well. No hot spots. Everything is as it should be. The tsuba is very small, so this kind of acts as a ledge to keep your hand from sliding up if you were to thrust, though not very much. It's entirely possible for you to slide up on the handle if you are really being vigorous in terms of thrusting. So this is not a great stop, but it is a little bit of something that acts as a tsuba. It's very small and a little bit different. I can't say that I minded it. It has a kind of a cool look to it, but at the same time, it offers even less hand protection than you're used to, and also doesn't stop my fingers from sliding up and potentially onto the blade. So it's a stylistic choice. I chose this though because it was different than what I'm used to, and this little tsuba in here is not bad. It has developed just a little bit of wiggle. I've taken this apart though. I've hit it on things, and it was very tight when I got it, and it's because I've done some abusive stuff that it has loosened up. If I tack it down a little bit, this would be maintenance that is very achievable, and I would say that the rattle that I'm experiencing right now is acceptable given the amount of use that I've given the sword. There are some copper seppa here, a brass habaki, and I should also note that the habaki is reasonably well fit. It has just a slightly better shape. I'm not a big fan of just standard brass habaki, given that I see so many of them so often. I don't think it's a thing that's going to bother a lot of people, but I will comment that this one seems reasonably well shaped. The manufacturer here, who again I believe is Shadow Dancer, does habaki pretty well, and the shaping on this for a sword in the $500 range is quite good. The tension on the saya was also good. It doesn't come out super easy, and I would say it was a little tighter when I got it, but generally speaking, it holds in reasonably well. The scabbard, as well as a little bit of profile taper to it, which is nice to see. Those are not common things that you get in swords of this price point. It's a simple red gloss scabbard. It has kind of a deep red to it, and it has not horn fittings on it, so I'm not exactly sure if this is like a plastic rim or what, but I would like to see horn fittings on the scabbard. I think that's an addition that is attractive and that I would personally like to see, but that's just me. The kurigata is wood. The scabbard doesn't have particularly high-end parts on it. At the same time, it does the job. It profile-wise looks nice, it holds well, and I guess it does the job. This did have a little bit of rattle in it, and has since I've gotten it, and I think it has to do with the Moroha Zukuri tip. Something in there isn't touching the same way a typical scabbard does, and this one just has had a little bit more rattle in it than I'm accustomed to from the manufacturer. Next, I'm going to talk about the blade, pointy stabby part, and this is a Moroha Zukuri geometry. So there's a little bit to unpack here. More or less, it has lots going on. So from here, it looks like just about any other katana. It has a bohi. It also has this little line here called a sohi, I believe. It transitions up to this middle section here where the bohi terminates. The sohi, this smaller line, continues down, but the spine cuts in and tapers down. So this swooping section here kind of tapers back, and the spine really thins out, and it almost becomes a secondary edge. Now, on a lot of Moroha Zukuri blades, this section here is in fact sharp. It's not a false edge, it's another edge, and more or less the top third or half would be a double-edged blade. On the Shadow Dancer, for some reason, it's not. This back edge appears to have a hamon on it. It appears to be heat treated the way you would expect these blades to be, but the back edge is not sharpened. It's also quite dull, so to get it sharp would have me diminishing the polish in a way that is very substantial and would look ugly. But the tip up here around this ledge area is really quite sharp, and so what that means is that this tip here is sharpened, and it acts like the Moroha Zukuri blade, but the back edge is not sharpened. So It doesn't let me play with some of the techniques that I was hoping to experience with the sword. I would hope that this back edge would be sharpened, because that's typically how Moro-hazakuri blades that I've seen should be. I'd imagine it has a hardened edge on the back so that it can be sharpened, and that this top half is supposed to be double-edged and not dull on the back. There may be a logic or reason behind why it's made this way, but I'm not exactly sure what it was. It's something of a surprise to me. And like I said, about an inch down, things get really quite sharp here on the tip, which is important because when you're doing Japanese style swordsmanship, when you're doing noto and you put the sword away, this sword kind of touches your wrist and slides down and finds this mouth area here, falls in, and that's how you put it away. Well, with this back edge sharp, if I do what I'm taught to do, I'm gonna slice the meat of my hand open and the red stuff is gonna flow. So I can't practice noto and drawing and sheathing the way that I'm used to, and it's muscle memory. There's a few times I've caught myself and had to stop abruptly while using this because I put the sword away like I'm used to, and then I'm like, oh no, don't do that. So it's kind of a dangerous thing to have around, just because my body thinks I know how to move it around, and I don't. It's very easy to potentially cut yourself. So if you're a dunce like me and you're used to using a single-edged Japanese sword to do iaido a lot, then this gets a little weird. But oddly, it's not double-edged, and the fact that it's not is probably why I haven't cut myself, because I want to say I remember right about here on the blade that I shouldn't be doing that. So on one hand, I'm a little bitter that it's not sharpened. On the other hand, I'm kind of grateful, because that's why I don't have stitches right now. Regardless, it's not, apart from the oddness in terms of sharpening, the blade has a good profile. It has a good curvature. The termination of the sohi up in the center area is good. The center ridge around the tip is good. The hamon is consistent. The polishing on it and lines are quite good. It's very, very smooth, even in the bohi. It's shaped really quite well and moves and cuts quite well. It came very sharp and did cutting quite well, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But as I finish up on the blade, it's an interesting geometry, one that I have to play with a little bit. It's an odd note, so note that this back edge is not sharpened. You may be able to request it be sharpened, but mine didn't come that way. And the Moro-hazakuri is interesting as a Japanese sword for thrusting. It feels a little different, and it's just been fun to play with a nicer version. It's been a long time since I've had a nicer Moro-hazakuri that's in good shape and kind of feels the part and has tight ito and whatnot. So this has been a fun sword to play with, even though I probably should stop playing with it because my brain just isn't ready for it. But a good sword all the same. Shadow Dancer does a great job. If Time Blade Guild is using them to make stuff, then they do a solid job making sword. I've enjoyed the vast majority of the products that Shadow Dancer has made and that I've seen. Anyway, talking about cutting with it, I talked about I've tried doing EI with it. It's weird. It moves and feels comfortable in the hand. If I was more used to it, I'm sure that I could manage doing EI with it. It feels comfortable. It has all the things there to do EI correctly. It's just my brain doesn't wrap around it with the sharp tip here, but it feels fine. If you're used to practicing with it, this will likely be a comfortable sword. In terms of cutting, it worked well. I cut lots of stuff with it. I cut bottles and pool noodles and all of those things. As a backyard fun cutter, it does a solid job. It's a little more fun to thrust with this sword than it is typically with a katana. I will give it that. I had a little bit more fun doing that. But in terms of cutting noodles, bottles, things like that, it cut all those things just fine. It is a differentially hardened blade. So if I did the slap on my stand test, bear in my stand is a 6x6 piece of lumber with a base on it. And so it's hard to move around, and I slap it pretty hard, the blade bends. And that's what differentially hardened blades often do. It's not a surprise, but hard slap with the stand got the blade to bend. It's not particularly resilient to bending is the main point. Now, it didn't bend over all the way. It's still like hardened. It still took a slight bend, but it's important to know that it is there. If you want to get something that's a little bit more resilient to being bashed around through hardened variety, which I imagine they also make in this style sword, would be a better feature if you intend on slapping 6x6s. In terms of cutting, though, it held up really well. In terms of thrusting, it was fun. It was a fun sword to move around. It's still a fun sword to hold. I slapped it on the opposite side. It straightened out, and now I just have this as an example when I compare different styles of geometry. But it held up. There was no edge deformation. I whacked like beer cans and stuff like that too. the edge, the heat treatment, all of that kind of stuff seemed to be right about where it should be, in that I didn't see any chips, any edge rolls, or any problems with the blade after doing the cutting. I cut in the neck of water bottles, and all of this stuff is things that you wouldn't hope a blade would be damaged on, but sometimes they are damaged. Sometimes cutting in the neck of a water bottle causes the edge to roll. Sometimes a bad cut on a bottle causes the blade to bend. It wasn't until I directly tried to bend the blade that I had a problem, and even cutting beer cans, which is debatably abusive, especially the rim of the can, didn't cause any edge deformation or issues. There's some scratches in the blade now, but that's to be expected when you do metal on metal contact. Regardless though, it held up well. It was fun to use. It came sharp. Good job. Okay, sword friends, I've shown you close-ups of the bits and bobs, fits and features. I've moved it, I've used it, I've talked about it, and hopefully at this point you know if it's worth your hard-earned money or not. For me personally, I think, yeah, $464 is about the right price for a sword like this. In fact, I think it's a pretty solid value. You get a lot for a little here. Things are nipped and tucked and clean and nice, and the sword offers some kind of obscure things that you don't often see. The Kogusumaru blade is one thing, the different style tsuba is another. Overall, I think this package is interesting if you like what it offers. It also is just generally a well-built thing. The Ito has held up well, the handle is well portioned, it draws and sheathes well, it cuts well. The blade held up well to doing some debatably dumb things. It might not seem crazy to chop into a stand, branches, water bottles. Those may not seem like hard targets, but they have diminished swords when they're not kind of up to the challenge. And this one held up. It didn't bend until I intended to bend it, and then only a little bit, and it straightened back out. It seems like a well-made thing with a lot of attention to detail in some of the areas that are often missed by other manufacturers. And I imagine you pay a little bit more for it, but at the same time, to me, that's worth it. I like those things being nipped and tucked. And Shadow Dancer, if they're the original manufacturer of these on behalf of Time Blade Guild, then it's no secret that I think they generally make pretty good stuff as well. So anyway, yes, I think this sword is worth it. If you're interested, check out the link to Time Blade Guild. They're not in the US from my understanding, so depending on your location, the shipping rates may be better. I also have some lightsabers from Time Blade Guild I'll be checking out or doing a formal review on in the not too distant future. Spoiler alert, it's some of the first lightsabers I've had, but they're super fun to move around. So I like the folks there. What they're offering on their website is pretty cool. I'd encourage you to check them out. That's all I've got though. Special thanks to the folks at Time Blade Guild for sending this sword my way. Hopefully it was interesting. Cheers, and thanks for watching.